just a little bit first thing in the morning. Welcome to the Yurt stream. I am going to transpose a file. And so this is what I was getting towards. I'm going to create a object that's going to handle our messages, right? And the idea is that we take a message name, like get environment or something like that, and a message index, or a message key or whatever. And we want it to be none. Null is a good thing. Null is your friend. And there's a message timeout default of 1 second. And then we take our magical kwargs, or keyword arguments. And keyword arguments are arguments like this: message name equals none. And you'll see often a pattern in this, right? So you got def function, right, ever. And whether it's a class method, meaning it has self or not, right? You'll have arguments, right? arg1, arg2, arg3, and you can pass those. And when you have a large method signature with a lot of arguments options, you're passing in variables, you're passing in objects or state or conditionals, right? So if we're like environment is live, network, debug equals true, whatever, right? That we've got all these things that we're passing in, and it gets kind of unwieldy. The answer is maybe create more objects, but Python is not really an object-oriented language. So a more Pythonic way of doing this is with, right, so you can have args, right? You can have environment, and you can have, maybe you have environment and we have startup equals true, something like that. So if the environment doesn't exist, it'll spin it up, in AWS or wherever it's at. But we might have a whole bunch of other flags, right? We might have network, we might have IAM rules if we're on Amazon, like access control rules. We might have a whole bunch of things associated with the environment that we have to pass in. But we normally don't, right? Most of the time we set up the defaults and everything's cool. So what we can do is we can pass in other than, right? So now we have one argument, we have one optional argument, which is true by default, and then we might have additional arguments, and we can specify that with asterisk args, right? And then we can put in those other things. But then the other thing we can do is after our asterisk args or whatever, and the position is important, args has to be at the end of the list, with the exception of kwargs, or keyword arguments. And I mean, you can call this whatever you want. You can call this foo, and you can call this bar. But the idea is you have I don't know if this is a reference to a list of arguments, and this way you have a reference to a list or to a dictionary of arguments, right? So that's how you do keyword arguments. And so what I'm doing here is, you can see here I've got all these things that are, I've got a couple of defaults here, and I've got a timeout. So I've got 3 defaults, and I've got this keyword arguments, and I'm just cutting and pasting from my other code. And by cutting and pasting, I mean retyping, right? And then I initialize these variables, and by convention, we use a underscore to denote a private or an internal variable, and that way we can do this. We could just do this like this, but for good Pythonic style, we want to do it this way: self dot message index equals the value of the message index we're passing, right? And what you might normally do is if you have a variable that you want to declare as an instance variable, you're going to do self dot whatever, right? And it's also a good practice to initialize that to some value, and the default value, none, is a good nulling argument. And I don't know, it might be, defaulted to none if you don't put equals none, but I'm not sure. It's something worth checking out. Let's see, Python self variable not initialize without default value. They think I'm not a bot, or they think I am a bot, okay? Python instance variable initialize without value. They still think I'm a bot. Okay, so Google has blocked me from using them. That's crap. All variables must be assigned a value upon creation. You cannot declare a variable without an initial value. Attempting to reference a variable. So yes, you can create them, but attempting a reference variable that has not been assigned a value will result in a name error. The standard approach to indicate a variable exists but does not yet hold a meaning values is to initialize it with the none keyword. So we should initialize our variables with none. All right. Okay. Cut and paste. The greatest source of errors on the planet. In space, the greatest source of errors in space is obviously the metric system. Whatever that Mars rover that supposedly crashed because they didn't know their metric system. Just kidding. And then here's something else I did, and this is probably not what I do. So I've got a list of messages, right? And I can do self.get all messages. And then we can pass in message name. And then we can pass in these other arguments that are needed for doing that. And right, so we would get all of our environments or all of our whatever. Right, the idea is that we're creating this generic function that can do what our environment service is doing, get environment, list environments, or get all environments, whatever it is, right? Now, so this is the way you can do injection via the constructor. Well, this is not injection really, this is just parameters, right? If I were passing an environment object in because this was needed for initializing the environment, that would be injection. But I also want to do this. Now in the future I can do, so like in my actual code that's using a message data object, I can do environments equals message data object, message name equals environment, something like that, right? And then I can do environments dot messages dot send, or maybe say messages sub-0 sub send, whatever we're doing there. But I want a way to access these things, right? And this is probably not Pythonic, right? The Pythonic way would be to just have a single variable, so I could do environments dot message. And that's perfectly fine, right? We can test this out by AI. Let's do that. Dude doesn't like me. Oh, I forgot to, no, here we go. Oh, there is no get all messages. Okay, so I need to create a dummy message. And we pass in self, which says the first variable is the object itself. Self is, again, right, it could be called itself. And you see this a lot in old JavaScript or whatever, this and that and whatever. But in Python, the convention is self. Damn Windows. What do we got? Exactly, keyword argument message name equals. Thank you for helping me out, Cursor. Like it rewrote this when I rewrote this, or it did it on its own. Maybe I did much. Got unexpected keyword argument. So now I'm going to just do args here. And I'm going to do args and kwargs. So what happens here is message name. We'll get past, actually I don't even need to do args, but we'll do that anyway. And then we'll pass the keyword arguments on again. We wanted message name down here. All right. Now, so we get message name is environment, and it does whatever, right? If we change our value here, it changes our value here. So then the next thing I want to do is I want to, rather than having these be public, because these are things I do not want to expose outside of it. In Python, there's no way to stop that. But I'm going to show you a little trick that I use, which is probably not the best way. But this is a way to make something like a data object, right? Hence message data object. And this is probably similar to if you use Java or C#, right? This is a getter function, right? So now this will still work with message name, even though message name underscore, what happened here? Metadata bound message name. That one there. I'm trying to pass the function. Because right now I'm doing that. And we get his environment. So we might have something called, get message name if we were in Java, but with camel case. But in order to make this work as if it was a property, there's similar things to, right? In C# you would do get, set, and do that. In JavaScript, you do like, or not in JavaScript, in TypeScript or whatever, But in Python, the way to do this is with a property attribute, and it's kind of janky, but it'll work. So I use this property uh, decorator. So annotation in Java, property in C#, is it called property, or it's called a decorator in, who said get message name? Nobody said get message name. So I just need to hit save. Okay, so now we can get our message name. The only problem is we can't do environments. Right, you would think you've got this decorator property, which makes it a property equals, right, foo, and then if we print message name, we'll see that it's still environments. Did I misspell it? Nope. But at property message name has no setter. Okay, if I read what it says, it'll tell me what it means. So right, this is the really janky thing about Python, and right, Python is not really object oriented. That's why we're a class is really a container. I think it's maybe just a package behind the scenes or a namespace. I don't know the right term, but each of these functions declared underneath our class need to pass the class instance itself for us to be able to do that. And so you need to do things. So what I can do is, this is the really thing. This message index decorator is created, or created is maybe not the right word, understood by the property decorator. So this is really bad, but this is the way they do it. So I do message index dot setter, and then I can do def message index. And this is my setter, right? And we can do self dot message in message name. That's why it was giving me the error. And we need to pass in self and value equals value. And bada boom, bada bing. It didn't set it. Because I have a typo. There we go, and it changes our environment. So, right, we can do properties like this, and we can set our arguments, our unnamed arguments, and we'll see that later. But now what I want to do is I want to extend my message data object, right? So I want to have class environment, and I'm going to extend message data object. And then I'm going to say message name equals environment. So I can do this. Should I think I'll go ahead and do that. I'm going to call super just to show, right? I'm not, this is a terrible lesson on metaprogramming because this is a lesson on object-oriented programming, right? 1 minute. No. Oh, That's right. So we are creating an init method, a constructor. Actually, it's not a constructor; it's an initializer. Python has a different way of constructing things that you normally don't do as a user, and that probably has to do with this, right? This message name setter. We need to parse this, construct something that has an actual function that handles the getter and the setter, because this decorator will create a function, and it will also parse this and create a function here, wrap this function to be able to right, set the value. And it does magic with the equals sign and all that. But anyway, so I could set the message name and everything, and I'm just duplicating code here, and then when it changes, I have to maintain it in two places, both the constructor of the parent class, my message data object, and the child class, my environment. So instead, I'm going to call super because it's super special. And this is again bad because it's Python. So we pass in the class name of this, and we pass in self to super, and then we call init. So I'm calling init on the super class, which will, right? I'm guessing it takes the environment class, does some reflection, and discovers that message data object is the class it inherits from, and then we pass in self because we always pass in self to point to a class. I think that's how it works. So now I can call the init on the super method, and I can do the methods. And notice here the trick, I'm not underscore message name, I'm calling this init method here. So I actually don't need to do anything here, except I want to pass in this variable. And now it should work. And now the nice thing is I've done all this work in my message data object, all my initialization. I've got this default message index and timeout. I can pass in these extra keyword arguments that I may or may not know how to use. I can get all messages. We haven't implemented this yet. And I have this property getter and setter for message name. And for environments, I just need to call super, the parent class, in this ugly way. And I can pass in, right? So now environment only takes a message name, which is defaulted to environment, and message index, message timeout, and whatever else are just going to be passed in extra or whatever as needed. But we don't need any of them, so we're just going to say environment just does this, and we can try this, and we can see this works. Now we can see here, I can change this, right? The argument, I might do something like that, and we can see its environments. Now, a common thing I do when I'm working with an API is I'll create a static, it's often for like the URL, right? I'll create a static or a class variable, and it might be foobar, whatever, or I'll call it URL, or I'll call it path. And then the path would be like the base URL set in my configuration, plus the path, plus any query string parameters that are set, potentially. So what I'll do here is I will do, and a good convention is to have it uppercase. And now I can do this, I can do, now I'm referring to this with self, and you can see it's warning me that that's not defined. Oh, that's because I don't want to pass this in here. I guess I can pass in message name, but right, I want to have a default. Actually, I don't want to pass in message name. I want environment to always be env or whatever I want it to be right here, right? But in my parent, I can pass in environment dot message name, and this is just right. Especially the URL is a great example. The URL is going to be used in a whole bunch of functions in an API client library, and so we reference that one time so that anywhere we want to access it, it's there. It's a class variable, not an instance variable, and that way, actually, if outside the class, then we can do right. We can do print environment dot message name, and you can see that's publicly accessible as well. And this is both documentation and whatever, a variable like abstraction, maintainability. So I'm going to do a little formatting here on this, and then I can also be like, I'm going to also pass in message timeout, and maybe I'll override that and say for environments our timeout is 2 seconds or something like that. And I can even pass in platform name, and maybe this is AWS, right? And notice how message data object does not have platform name, but we're going to see it in our keyword arguments. I think that's it for today. I've got to get ready for workings. We'll see you.